Welcome to God's 5 Minutes with Pastor Ed Wilson. Reach him at gods5minutes@gmail.com. Now, here's Ed Wilson with God's 5 Minutes.
Hello, friends. 1 Kings 18:12 reads, I, thy servant, fear the Lord from my youth. The words belong to a man named Obadiah, who was not the author of the book of that name, but rather an official in Ahab's court in the time of Elijah. He's one of the more obscure figures in the Old Testament. The short passages in this book are all we ever hear of him, and yet how distinctly he stands out from the canvas, so he's only sketched with a few bold outlines. He is the governor over Ahab's house, a kind of mayor of the palace, maybe the second man in the kingdom. But though he held such an important position in that idolatrous and self-willed court, he had bravely kept true to the ancient faith. Neither Jezebel's flatteries nor her frowns had moved him. But there, amid apostasy and idolatry, he stands, probably all alone in the court, a worshiper of Jehovah. His name is his character, for it means servant of Jehovah. It was not a light thing to be a worshiper of the God of Israel in Ahab's court. The feminine rage of the fierce Sidonian woman, whom Ahab obeyed in most things, burned hot against the enemies of her father's gods, and hotter perhaps against anyone who frustrated her imperious will. Obadiah did both in one audacious, benevolent act when he sheltered the Lord's prophets, 100 of them, saved them from her cruel search. The writer of the book very rightly marks his brave antagonism to the outburst of the queen's wrath as a signal proof of a more than ordinary devotion to the worship and fear of Jehovah. Perhaps the fact that his firmness and his religion did not cost him his place of honor and dignity says something for Ahab, weak-willed powder that he was. Perhaps it says even more about Obadiah and how God protected him. So here we find, wrapped up in just a few short verses and otherwise wholly lost in the misty past, the brief recorded story of one more of God's heroes. One wonders how many there have been through the ages, both of men and women. Surely heaven is populated with them, and no doubt many of them are people of whom today's world knows nothing. Faithful Obadiah is only one more of a long line of those rugged soldiers of the faith who left footprints in the Bible to inspire us who walk behind to pick up their banner and never let it trail in the dust. Were they, who had so much less of the understanding of the gospel than we, could be so brave to risk all for what they understood to be right, so may we, friend, so may we. There are worse things than death. Better to refuse to betray your friends. Better to set yourselves to the protection of and provision for your own home and hearth than to fill a coward's grave. Better to suffer all the bitterest persecution heartless men can offer or remorseless Satan can devise than to turn away from your Lord and deny his name. There is nothing worth dying for, then there is really nothing worth living for. Obadiah was afraid when he spoke these words. Elijah had just told him to take a message to feckless Ahab. And Obadiah felt sure he'd be aroused by it, and that the Spirit of God would steal Elijah away, would dire consequences to the one who acted as his messenger. Notice Elijah's words. While he guaranteed to not depart, with one phrase he supplied the answers to Obadiah's fears, with that phrase, to all God's trusting children as well. As the Lord of hosts liveth, before whom I stand. As the Lord of hosts liveth, he lived then, and both Ahab and Jezebel were in his hand. When the fullness of time had come, both of them met ignominious fates beneath the curse of that God whom they had so foolishly and relentlessly fought. He lived here on earth. He lived on Calvary's tree and rose from the death inflicted, piercing in his nails. Elijah was real, and he, by God's working, performed real miracles. The witness he gave Obadiah was that he stood before that God as proof that he was supported and reinforced by his very throne. The mere fact of Obadiah's being entrusted to deliver the prophet's message brought him under the umbrella of Elijah's protective blessing. We serve the same God. Have you talked to him today?
You have been listening to God's 5 Minutes with Pastor Ed Wilson. Reach him by email at godsfive-minutes@gmail.com. Tune in next time to hear more encouraging thoughts from God's Word on God's 5 Minutes with Pastor Ed Wilson.
Never miss your favorite show again. For more than 30 years, KNEO has been bringing you great Bible teachers on a local and national level. And now, we've made it easier than ever to hear from these great men and women of God. KNEO's entire lineup is now available to listen anytime, anywhere, through our website. Go to kneo.org/podcast to see all the options. You can search for programs alphabetically, or you can select individual categories like culture, kids, leadership, or music. We even have a category just for locally produced programs, so you can hear from pastors and spiritual leaders located right here in the 4-state area. And all these resources are absolutely free. KNEO's mission is to get God's Word in front of you, and this is one of the ways we do it. Give it a try today. Go to kneo.org and click on the podcast tab to get started.